Welcome to Uncovering Real Estate, presented by the Brampton Real Estate Board. I'm your host today, Wasim Parkar. Today's topic is going to be residential tenancy, and obviously this is a topic of great interest to many people, since many people do rent over the course of their lives here in Canada, in the GTA, Brampton, Mississauga, all over the place. To talk about this in greater depth, I have with me Mark Weisleder, real estate lawyer from realestateLawyers.ca. Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Wasim. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you, Mark. Mark, this is obviously a very important topic because most people over the course of their lives, not everyone straight out of school buys a house. People rent due to different circumstances. One of the big notions that most people have in terms of residential tenancy is that the law is advantageous to the tenant. Some may say almost extremely so. Is that the case?
Well, I think people have to remember that whether you're a landlord or a tenant, that if a family gets evicted from a home and they become homeless, then it's up to the government to have to look after these people. And it costs a lot of money. And so the government is never going to make it easy to evict anyone. And that's just the way it's going to be, no matter what you say. Okay. So the important thing for a landlord is to always properly qualify tenants to make sure they get the right person looking after their property.
Do the due diligence, basically.
It's the proper due diligence. Okay. That's right.
Okay. Mark, keep going on from that. What would you say is the most important principle in the Residential Tenancies Act of Ontario, per se?
Yeah, so to me, the most important principle where it all starts from is it says that if you put anything in a lease that violates the act, it's void. So it doesn't matter if the tenant and landlord agree. If it's against the act, it's void.
Could you care to explain that in further detail?
Terrific. Okay. Let's say the landlord and tenant agree, no dogs in the house.
Okay.
The tenant comes in, even though they promised no dogs, they come in the day after the lease starts, they bring in 2 dogs. There's nothing the landlord can do because the act says no pet clauses are void. The only time you can have a no pet clause is if you're in a condominium, for example, and they have rules that say no pets, or perhaps if the person is blind and they need a seeing eye dog, then you have a human rights issue. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what the lease says. That's what I mean by saying it doesn't matter if you put it in the lease. If it violates the act, it's void.
So it's interesting you mentioned that in a condominium it's probably enforceable. Is that because there's a management to take care and look after those issues? Is that the reason why?
No, it's in the condominium papers. Not every condominium actually says no pets. Many condominiums permit pets. And if it's permitted, then the tenant can bring a pet as well.
Okay, very interesting. And these can also relate to issues of sometimes a security deposit or repairs, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, a great example. The most a landlord can request in advance is the first and last month's rent.
Okay.
A lot of landlords like to ask for this damage deposit, and the tenant might agree to pay it. It's not legal. It's not legal at all. You can't.
This is separate from your rent?
Separate from the first and last month's rent, or some people call it a security deposit.
Okay.
Not allowed. Now, there are certain things that you can charge for. For example, you can charge a key deposit provided it's refundable at the end of the lease.
Okay.
For NSF checks, let's say a tenant check is not good. A landlord can charge $20 plus whatever the bank charged them.
Okay.
I see a lot of leases where that says tenant will pay $100 if any check is returned.
Yeah.
That's not legal. And it doesn't matter if the landlord and tenant agree to it. If it goes against the act, it's void.
Wow. It's really interesting because I'm pretty sure, and this is not to put anyone down, but there are a lot of tenants and a lot of landlords who probably have their own agreements. They come to some kind of mutual agreement that probably falls outside the parameters of what the law provides, right?
Yes, and as long as it is relatively reasonable, my advice is it's better to follow that agreement and maintain good relations with each other than to try to run to lawyers to challenge something when it may not be that big a deal, because then you ruin the relationship. And it's very important, for landlords to recognize that tenants are really their partners. They're looking after that property. And if you treat the tenant in a good way, they're going to take care of your property and your investment a lot better. And I want to make it clear that over 95% of all tenants are good tenants. I don't want to leave the impression that all tenants are bad. It's a very small percentage. You just got to make sure they don't end up in your property.
No, I think, and I think you brought up a very good point, because I agree with you. I think most people will acknowledge that most tenants are good, but yet for a landlord, that is a source of stress, that is a source of tension when finding. How can a landlord ensure that they're getting the right tenant?
It really comes qualifying. So number one, they have to fill out an application. You should call all the references. They may give you the name of their landlord. You know, I'd be careful about speaking to their current landlord because he might lie just to get rid of them. You want to speak to the landlord before the current landlord first. You know, their job, to make sure they're working, to get proof of their income so that, you know, you can see. Ask them to bring their pay stub from the last payday so you can see that they're getting paid on a regular basis. So, and besides doing these checks, you know, there are some other things you can do. People say, Mark, how do I know they're not lying about pets?
Yeah.
Okay, so I say, check them on Facebook.
Yeah.
If they got a pet, there'll be a picture of them with the dog on Facebook. So that's, you know, one thing that you can do. Also, some people will interview the tenant where the tenant lives now. And that way they can go there and see how the tenant looks after someone else's property. And it's also hard to hide the smell of a dog if you're visiting the tenant at their premises. So there are things you can do to properly qualify a tenant.
So there are lots of different prudent measures. You've highlighted some. We'll talk with Mark in more depth after the break. Folks, stay tuned to Uncovering Real Estate, presented by the Brampton Real Estate Board.